Mr. Speaker, the 2014 budget presentation by the Honorable Ashley Singh is the third which I've had the dubious privilege of listening to. I had eagerly looked forward to the Minister's dissemination of information in respect to his plans for 2014. But sad to say, the end of his monologue left me wondering what's new. I say what is new deliberately, because to my ears, in the main, it was nothing but a regurgitation of the issues he addressed in the first and second years, with the usual famous boast made at the end of each presentation, which always indicate that the budget for that year is Guyana's largest budget ever. At this time, I wish to say a special thank you to my colleague, the Honorable Carl Bridge, for taking the time to put into context the issue of the largest budget ever. Mr. Speaker, as in the case of last year's budget, I would like to make a small contribution to the debate in the area of governance. The 3-paragraph section on governance appears on pages 63 to 64 of the budget speech, but the treatment borders on the trivial and dismissive. One paragraph tersely refers to the impasse in the money laundering bill. The second paragraph, even more briefly, refers to the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, and then aimlessly states that Guyana's report is the report of the OS mechanism for the implementation of the Convention Against Corruption on its review of Guyana are now publicly available. The third paragraph gives a few selected examples of ad hoc consultations with selected stakeholders. However, the Minister, in a moment of sober reflection, will want to agree that the issue of governance is a much more structural and multifaceted phenomenon. Good governance, Mr. Speaker, requires inclusion of the following. 1, sharing of information and timely disclosure. 2, transparency and accountability. 3, recognition of Parliament and the judiciary as sources of authority besides the executive. 4, a capacity to compromise. 5, establishment of key institutions and commissions. 6, effective implementation and praxis of these institutions. 7, integrity and public disclosure of parliamentarians' assets. 8, non-corruptibility in the issuance of contracts and conduct of ministers and public officials. 9, a less than overbearing central government system vis-a-vis local government. And 10, meaningful power sharing and decentralization. I have listed some of the salient aspects of good governance to remind the Minister of Finance of what should also constitute the process and path, as he puts it, to a better Guyana for all Guyanese. In reference to the citing of the money laundering impasse, I will also like to inform the Minister, his colleagues, and the unyielding President of Guyana of a celebrated principle called a single undertaking that underlies international trade negotiations. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance is fulsome in his praise and trumpeting of the 5% growth rate achieved by the economy of Guyana, forgetting that this is what will be expected since the country is rising from a very low economic base. But permit me to state that if we were fortunate enough to have good governance, instead of the current perversion, the economy will probably have grown by 10%, no less. Such a stellar achievement is not possible in this current regime, partly because bad governance results in poor project choice, corrupt contracting of incompetence, distortion of economic decision-making by cronyism and partisan political considerations, and suboptimal levels of capital investment by both foreigners and locals because of uncontrolled levels of crime. The Minister also wallows in self-praise by saying that it is, and I quote, government's attention to stable macroeconomic fundamentals, and prudent public financial management that has contributed to the economic resilience we have achieved. This can be found on page 7. An objective observer can equally state that the 5% growth rate will have been achieved regardless of government's efforts. What indeed has been government's contribution to the following? First, drug proceeds have been poured into Guyana, and construction and other commercial activities have been the beneficiaries without any major risks of the money launderers. Second, substantial remittances from abroad have also helped to fuel construction and retail activity. Third, and very importantly, the most high-performing and export-related activity has been as a result
Mr. Trotman, 1 minute, please.
Mr. Speaker, a very important statement was just made by the honourable member that needs urgent clarification. When he said that the construction sector is a result of drug proceeds and money laundering. If the honourable member cannot provide evidence to justify this false claim, I think it will be extremely irresponsible of him, and it can be read out of context by the many hard-working Guyanese who are building and expanding their businesses and their entities in our society. So I am calling on the honourable member to provide the evidence from which he formed this basis. Thank you.
Mr. Trotman, could you repeat what you said, please?
Mr. Speaker, this is what I said. What indeed has been government's contribution to the following? First, drug proceeds have been poured into Guyana, and construction and other commercial activities have been the beneficiaries without any major assets of the money launderers.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. One second. I'm a member, Mr. Ali. The member did not name anyone. He said into the sector. He did not say whether 10% of the sector or 90% of it is affected. I believe that I have read sufficient data and analyses on Guyana, which suggest indeed that there is some illicit proceeds of narcotics and other illicit trades in every sector in this country. So I believe that the statement is general enough so as not to offend you. I know that you head the government's aspect of that sector, but I don't believe that the statement in any way is offensive, and in fact reflects quite accurately what is an accepted fact, that narco trafficking is indeed infiltrating into various, if not all, the sectors of this country, and whether it be the legal system, and it is a known fact. And as I said, I only yesterday read an analysis on our economy, and that was quite palpably stated. Go ahead, please, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Second, substantial remittances from abroad have also helped to fuel construction and retail activity. Third, and very importantly, the most high-performing and export-related activity has been as a result of hardy gold miners braving the elements in an unforgiving interior environment without government provision of adequate road access or requested fuel subsidies to take advantage of fortuitously high international gold prices. A good question is what remedial governance-related actions the PPP regime will employ when the gold price reverts historical norms and the reserve pool of young unemployed swells again to alarming proportions. In this regard also, it should be noted that receipt of worker remittances declined by US $141.1 million to US $328.2 million, page 7. Probably reflecting a tapering off of the residential housing boom. Also, international foreign exchange reserves at the end of 2013 only amounted to US $776.9 million, equivalent to 3.9 months of import cover compared with the 5 months of import cover that obtained in the previous year. In addition, implementation of anti-money laundering legislation may reduce the flow of illicit funds. Storm clouds are gathering, and growth sustainability is in question. Moreover, Guyana has not seen it fit to establish a stabilization fund, unlike, for example, Trinidad and Tobago, which before the advent of the global financial and economic crisis had built up in good times a heritage and stabilization fund in order to cope with inevitable hard times, so much for good governance and contingency planning. Mr. Speaker, one means of bolstering the country's resilience is ensuring that all economic and social actors are involved. In this regard, there is an important role for enhanced local governance. There is need for greater empowerment of the people, and this can be achieved via strengthening of the municipalities and neighborhood democratic councils wherever they exist, and active revitalization of the economies in the more depressed communities with income and employment generation measures. However, the current central government regime, imbued with the socialist tenets of democratic centralism, has seen it fit to wage war against the local government organs by displacing, dismantling, and disembodying same, refusing to make available expected fiscal subventions, and declining to give permission for revenue-raising measures. It is instructive that an opposite process of decentralization and devolution of power is taking place in other countries. For example, in the European Union, as shares of total government expenditure in 2012, central government accounted for 37%, state government 8%, local government 23%, and social security funds 32%. With respect to total government expenditure in 2012, relatively high shares of local government expenditure are observed in Denmark, 61%, Sweden, 49%, Finland, 40%, Norway, 34%, Netherlands, 32%, and Italy, 29%. This can be found in the Eurostat European Commission May 2013 report. The figure in Guyana is probably less than 5%. The assault on the local government system in Guyana must come to an end. Presidential assent to local government reform legislation must be completed. Elections must take place this year. I wish to turn my attention to the performance of the local government and regional development ministry, and in the process address the proposed allocations earmarked for the regional administrators. Mr. Speaker, and just let me begin by saying that without a doubt the performance of the Ministry of Regional Development and Local Government in 2012 and 2013 left a lot to be desired. This trend continues in 2014. To my mind, there seems to be a lot of confusion on the part of the persons charged with the responsibility of overseeing the function of this ministry. I note, sir, that the ministry's mission statement enunciates the following tasks: supervise and maintain the legal regulatory framework of the system of local and regional administration, encourage and facilitate the economic development of the regions, promote the continued integration of the hinterland communities into the wider Guyanese society, and encourage self-sufficiency and social development in the hinterland regions. What is implied in these tasks is that development must take place within the legal structures of the system and for the benefit of all the people who live, work, play, and die within regional administrative and local government communities. I submit here, sir, that when one examines the function of the ministry, the inescapable conclusion which will be arrived at is that the ministry has not been operating within the boundaries of the law and for the equal benefit of all of the people who fall within the respective communities. Too often we hear complaints of the relevant ministers using the resources of the state to advance the partisan political interests of the party in government and imposing their will on certain non-PPP administrative bodies while at the same time ignoring the pleas of elected officials in these bodies to facilitate their functioning in keeping with the law. If truth be told, Mr. Speaker, the reason why every year the Auditor General is forced to issue his scathing comments on the operation of the regional administrations has to do with the fact that the regional administrators are doing their own thing as a result of the restraints placed on elected councillors by the REOs and by extension, the minister. Mr. Speaker, the minister may wish to deny being involved in any way in the harnessing of councillors and carrying out their legitimate functions. However, until such time, and as he can justify when the several calls to him by councillors from Region 4 and 8 RDCs, just to name two, to be provided with the resources to monitor the works which have allegedly been done on behalf of the people, until he can, to the satisfaction of members of this honorable house, provide us with an answer to this riddle, he will continue to be accused of collaborating to prevent regional councillors to carry out their duties, and the Auditor General will continue to make his scathing remarks, and the people will continue to be denied value for money in the execution of projects. Mr. Speaker, we have had cause on several occasions over the last 3 years to speak in this honorable house to the obstruction methods of the regional executive officers. The Auditor General himself has provided numerous instances of payments for shoddy work, overpayments of money for work done, and payments for work not done in the regions. Members of the Public Accounts Committee from both sides of the House have expressed alarm, disgust, and anger at the regularity at which these offences are being committed, and yet nothing has been done or is being done to bring a halt to these scams. Yes, scams are what they are, and I dare the minister to say it differently. No one has been surcharged, and there has been no instance of the police being called in to examine this escalating criminal situation. We cannot and shall not ignore the fact that the people are being poorly served, not by their elected officials, but by those persons employed as administrative officials within the system. All of these things are happening while the minister tinkers with a system that potentially, if given the opportunity to work, can play a meaningful role in the development of people. Let me at this time remind the minister that in carrying out his function, he has a duty to ensure that the people can contribute to a system of governance which they have confidence in. The people are allowed under the aegis of local government the right to elect their own officials and not to have people foisted on them. Sir, I wish to reiterate something I said when we debated the local government amendment election bill a few weeks ago. I quote, "People want garbage-free communities. They want qualified administrators capable of quick, efficient responses to flood and deteriorating health situations. And they want to elect their own officials. What they don't want are hand-picked hacks and dunderheads who are incapable of recognizing their nose hole from their posterior. And more importantly, they are fed up with the minister's presence and his micromanagement of the system." Mr. Speaker, that position is as true today as when I first said it. I therefore wish to use this opportunity to call on the minister.
Mr. Trotman, you have 5 minutes within which to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. I therefore wish to use this opportunity to call on the minister to abandon the insulting, ridiculous position he holds, which says that people are not ready for local government elections, and urge him to move with haste to appoint the date when local government elections are to be held in Guyana. That is what the people want, and is what they must have. Yes. Mr. Speaker, I have looked at the allocations made for the regions, and my colleague, Mr. Ronald Balcon, has eloquently dealt with them. And I do not believe that I need to add very much to what he has said. But I want to say one thing in relation to the allocations for regions 1, 7, 8, and 9, and in particular Region 8, which provides the greatest logistical problems in relation to the delivery of services to the people in that region. To my mind, Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocations for those regions fall far short of what is required to meaningfully impact the manifold problems which plague those communities. Additionally, the reduction of expenditure in respect to public works in Region 8, bearing in mind what the situation on the ground is to my mind worrying and frightening. What are the reasons for this reduction? Does it have to do with the inability of the administration to spend the voted provisions in 2013? Sir, if that is the case, the thing to do is not to penalize the people by reducing the allocations, but to remove the administrator and replace him with someone who is competent and understands the need to get things done in a timely fashion. Mr. Speaker, in spite of the contribution that Region 8 has been making to the country's coffers, it continues to be denied the degree of financial support from central government which is required to lift it out of the doldrums. The reality is that life in that region, especially for people in Sub-Region 1, is a far cry from what it should be. The government shall therefore move to adopt a more even-handed approach in respect to the development needs of the people in that and other hinterland regions. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I believe the inadequacies, the weaknesses, the failings of the 2014 budget have already been and will continue to be appropriately addressed by those of us on this side of the House as we continue to engage the debate of this year's estimates. I believe the efforts of pointing out the shortfalls in Minister Ashley Singh's proposal for this year should be seen for what they are: comprehensive, objective criticisms by those of us on this side of the House. The views expressed have nothing to do with spiteful or vindictiveness, but are formed out of a desire to take Guyana beyond where it is at presently. The criticism provides us with an opportunity to reflect on and to reformulate some of the proposals and to represent them in a more acceptable form. I hope government is capable of doing this, because if it isn't, those of us who represent the APNU, and I dare say the AFC, will join in ensuring that the budget will not go farther than where it is at this particular point in time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.